Hello everyone and welcome to Season 7, Episode 26 of Pro Wrestling's Top 50. I'm your host Travis McNeil, and today we continue our countdown of the top 50 matches in CHIKARA history with match number 25 on our list, the halfway point, which is the King of Trios Tournament quarterfinals match between Team Uppercut of Claudio Castagnoli, Bryan Danielson, and Squire Dave Taylor against the Masters of 1,000 Holds team of Mike Quackenbush, Johnny Saint, and Skayde from the CHIKARA King of Trios 2009 Night 2 event held on March the 28th of 2009. King of Trios 2009 is one of my favorite CHIKARA weekends of all time. So much star power, wrestlers being brought in from literally all over the world for it. Incredible matches up and down the card. The famous Rey de Voladores tournament with Dakota Ibushi 4-way. The tournament really had everything you can ask for, including an outstanding performance all tournament long from unsung CHIKARA legend, the American Dragon, Bryan Danielson. He's someone that didn't have many CHIKARA matches and always kind of felt like a little out of place in CHIKARA, but at the same time delivered some of the best matches in the company's history. He was phenomenal in CHIKARA. He got to show a little bit more of his playful and crowd interaction side, along with all of the technical skill we know from him. I loved Bryan Danielson in CHIKARA. I wish we could have gotten more of it. Unfortunately, his debut for the promotion was in 2009, which would ultimately pretty much end up being his final year on the independents. You get that, little blip during that weird firing period in 2010. But ultimately, he would have a very fruitful WWE career from there. This match, though, was a match that you kind of knew had to happen when you saw the lineup for King of Trios. You couldn't pass up the opportunity to have Johnny Saint and Dave Taylor, two, legends of the British, world of sport wrestling scene, square off. But more so than that, even the American Dragon Bryan Danielson potentially locking up with Johnny Saint is just one of the coolest pairings that would never seem imaginable, but if any promotion could make it happen, it was, of course, CHIKARA. And I've said it before, but I think really, a good part of CHIKARA's legacy is going to be the exposure it gave to so many legendary wrestling promotions and wrestlers that never really got that mainstream U.S. exposure, that were really kind of more those niche, tape trader sort of legends that really got, their flowers through CHIKARA. Johnny Saint certainly being one of them. I've talked about so many of the Joshi wrestlers as well. But it was, wonderful to see Johnny Saint get to wrestle in CHIKARA the way he did. And this match wasted no time having him lock up with Bryan Danielson. It's just as good as you would hope. One, I'll call it a criticism, I guess, on that World of Sport style is, the way that, a lot of wrestlers that imitate that on the U.S. independents, they really don't sell the holds, right? It's kind of, do-si-do, like in and out of all of these maneuvers. And I remember hearing a Bryan Danielson interview once where he criticized that, basically saying like, why would you spin around a guy 3 times to go from a headlock or a hammerlock back into that same headlock or hammerlock? It doesn't make sense. And it's kind of just, showing that you can do something for the sake of doing it. And I remember my good friend Tom Green, I don't know if he's ever going to see this video, but he wrote kind of a little article or essay, back in the early 2000s, and it was called, I believe, A Different Kind of Spot Fest. And it was talking about, I want to say like an Eric Cannon versus Alex Shelley IWA Mid-South match. And I love both of those guys, don't get me wrong, but it had a lot of these same valid, in my opinion, criticisms of basically like, you do all of these fancy holds and counter holds to pop the crowd like you would see in a spot fest, where it doesn't necessarily make sense. And I know he was really kind of dragged through the coals by a lot of people for that article. But then again, Bryan Danielson says the same thing a couple years later, and people are like, oh, yes, of course, good point. But where I'm going with this is that Danielson does such a good job when he's in the ring with Saint, really selling all of the holds. So as Johnny Saint, transitions from a hammerlock to a headlock and and back and forth and all these dips and doodles and things to get into these moves, these transitions, Danielson is selling all of them to make it make sense. And that's why he's such a pro and one of the best professional wrestlers of my generation by far. In the early goings of this match, though, it does feel really exhibition-y, and there's nothing wrong with that because I think that's kind of what everybody wanted to see. They wanted to see every pairing kind of mix it up. You get a great sequence between Quack and Claudio, who are super, super familiar with each other, obviously. There's a great moment where Claudio goes for the giant swing, and Quack basically just grabs both of his legs so he can't move them, which was really, really clever and cool. At this period, Claudio kind of had a signature bump he was taking where he would take a monkey flip and kind of like take it onto his face instead of flipping over onto his back. So they do that here. We get a really weird pairing of Dave Taylor and Skayde, which on paper makes no sense. But then when you really start to mull it over, it makes a lot of sense because Steve Regal, William Regal, whatever you want to call him, loved working the luchadors in WCW, had great matches with Psychosis. If you've never seen them, make sure you check those out. So it didn't surprise me to see Dave Taylor in there kind of doing a little bit of lucha stuff with Skayde and doing some head scissors and throwing a great drop kick and everything like that. It was really, really cool. There's a great moment with Johnny Saint too, where he flips everyone on like these single leg takedowns until, finally Claudio is able to block it. Claudio is so good. He's a great base for Skayde. Skayde is a legend, such a huge influence on so many wrestlers over the years. But he's somebody that, in CHIKARA especially, not always the cleanest wrestler, but Claudio is such an outstanding base. He makes everything that Skayde does, all of these fancy arm drags and everything like that, look phenomenal. Where this match really starts to pick up, though, is about halfway through when Quack goes for Danielson's bad knee. In the first round, the Team Uppercut trio took on the trio of the Roughnecks of Brody Lee, Grizzly Redwood, and Eddie Kingston. And Danielson's knee was targeted in that match, and it would become this story all tournament long that would eventually lead to him submitting to Chuck Taylor's cross crab, his half crab, in the finals of the tournament. So once, Quack goes for that knee here, that's where things really start to get chippy. And Danielson is just an absolute prick. Everything up until that point, like I said, had been exhibition-y and friendly, but, Danielson teases, shaking hands with Skayde, then just hits him. That, pisses off Quackenbush, who at that point, is completely unapologetic in going after Danielson's knee. And now we take all of these, this great chemistry that all six of these guys have and all of these great interactions they've had. And now we add that story into it and we add that almost grudge match factor to it. And it just takes the match to another level and makes it a complete classic. The Uppercut trio becomes brutal and vicious. You've got Dave Taylor in there, one of the blue bloods, just as vicious as you could be. Claudio and Danielson, who now, that Blackpool Combat Club, they're ruthless and they love violence and they really start to see that. They're talking trash and finally throwing all of those brutal uppercuts that, their name implies they should be doing. There's an amazing moment where Quackenbush puts Danielson in the cattle mutilation, which I loved, and starts hitting him with the MMA style elbows and stuff like that. And I love everything in this match. Things really start to break down at the end. We don't get an elongated finishing sequence with a bunch of kickouts or anything like that. Basically, Skayde hits a big dive, the first of the match. That gives an opening for Quackenbush to go for a top rope hurricanrana on Claudio. It's countered into an avalanche Ricola bomb. That's a murder death kill finishing move if I've ever seen one. It puts Quack down for the 3 and gives Team Uppercut the win. This is a match that goes over 30 minutes long, and watching it, I'm just left wanting more, which is the best possible compliment you can give a long-form match. It never overstays its welcome. It's very fulfilling. It's got, a good, clean finish on it. But I wanted more out of it. I could have watched another 15 minutes of the opening stuff. I could have watched another 15 minutes of the grudge match stuff. And I could have watched, an elongated 10-minute super indie kick-out fest of a finisher. I could have easily watched this go to a full 60 minutes. But what I got here is phenomenal. I'm so grateful that we got it, especially, like I said, for that Danielson and Johnny Saint interaction. I love this match. I loved it at the time. I think it holds up arguably even better now, 13 years later. It is a must-watch if you've never seen it, and a really, really great revisit if you have. Of course, you can watch this match on independentwrestling.tv. You can subscribe to my channel here on YouTube so that you never miss a video. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Wrestling50. And please join me again next time as we continue to count down Pro Wrestling's Top 50.